Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and as promised, I am back with a review of the Audeze CRBN, stylized as CRBN, open back electrostatic headphone that comes in at $4,500 US. Alright, so as usual, again, I am Wave Theory. I have this channel here where I review sound gear, mostly headphone gear so far, a little bit of speakers. But if you have not already, please like and subscribe to my channel. And everyone, please be on the lookout for how you could continue to support me going forward as well. Alright, so what is this guy? So as I said, this is an electrostatic headphone, and I posted recently a video about just things that I have learned having eStats around, because I have not had much experience with electrostatic headphones prior to this, and a couple of Stax models that were loaned to me recently as well. So this has been quite an experience. So let's dive into this one and what makes this one tick. So as I said, this one is $4,500 US. And I explained a little bit about how electrostatic headphones are built and how they work in that previous video, which I will link to down below. But this one does something Audeze claims is unique with their membrane, in that they put carbon nanotubes in their vibrating membrane to more uniformly distribute the charge and get more of a solid sheet of piston area moving back and forth to move air to create the sound waves that eventually reach our ears. Alright, so yeah, let's dive more into this one. That's a pretty interesting idea. Now, this was released last year in 2021. It is mid-February 2022 when I filmed this video. Right, and I reviewed 3 Audeze planar magnetic headphones last year. Those were the LCD-R, which came with the shit Jotunheim A current drive amp. And let's see, what else was in there? The LCD X 2021 edition, and then their new planar flagship, the LCD 5. This was also part of their wave of new releases back in 2021. And at least from those 3 planars, I thought 2021 was a very good year for Audeze. And so now I finally had a chance to hear this one. And you know what? I still think 2021 was a pretty good year for Audeze. Alright, so let's find out why I say that about this one. Now, the build of this thing is unfamiliar, or not entirely unfamiliar. It's kind of, to me, it looks like a hybrid of the Audeze LCD series and Hi-Fi-Man. Right? Hi-Fi-Man has those big egg-shaped ear cups and all of that. Like, this is sort of like that with a more Audeze-like styling on it. Like we see on the back of the grill here, we have this like kind of 3-dimensional cube geometric pattern thing going on here with, you know, perspective view looking at one of the corners of those cubes. And then we have that silvery mesh material behind that grill work to protect all of the inner workings in there and all of that. So I mean, I think it's a good looking headphone. It's got the classic like Audeze LCD suspension strap headband system here. It has fairly big ear openings here, at least vertically, maybe not this way, but definitely vertically. All that, and then the pads are reasonably deep. The pads have a slight forward tilt to them, so there is a slight toe in when they are on your head. We have plenty of swivel here, okay, and all of that, and so forth. It fits on the head pretty well. Like, it's reasonably comfortable. It does clamp kind of hard, and I think that's because of the carbon fiber headband from LCD, or from Audeze. Like on their LCD things, like those can clamp pretty hard, and they need some break-in on that to loosen up a little bit, but it's not terrible. And the pads are nice and soft. I find it fairly comfortable even with that clamp on it. So I think overall it's pretty well built, and it's not super heavy. Like Audeze LCDs, like I have my LCD2 pre-phaser here, like these things are heavy, right? And they can be a beast on the head at times. This is significantly lighter than those, and so it's a little more comfortable for extended listening sessions as a result of that. These have a mass of about 500 grams. I put them on a postal scale that I have here, and so that's not super light, but it's also not ridiculously heavy. Now, the cabling system is attached, and this is a pretty standard feature I have seen with electrostats, is they all come with attached cables. And that's also Probably because they all have this kind of connection. Maybe not all, but this is like the standard E-stat connection. It's a 5-pin barrel connector that goes into the amp. All right. Now the other drawback here of the carbon from a build standpoint is like this headphone has had more driver crinkle in it than any headphone I have ever used. Okay, there's a lot. Like I might be able to get it to do it for you here. Don't know if you can hear that or not. Okay, but when it's particularly when it's plugged in to an amp, like anytime you close it here, like not even push the pads together, but anytime you open it up here, you can hear that driver crinkle. Anytime you break the seal from the side of your head, you can hear that driver crinkle. You can hear the crinkle again when they're plugged into the amp, that is, like when they're back here. Like this, the crinkle on these is bad. So just be aware of that if that's something you're interested in. That's a build quirk here. Okay, sound. That's what we're all after here ultimately, isn't it? Okay. Now, it needs to be said that my experience with electrostatic headphones is somewhat limited. This and the 2 Stax models that were loaned to me recently are the only electrostats I've really ever had any meaningful time with. And I've had only one electrostatic energizer / amplifier to use with all 3 of those, and that is the Molnir Audio Carbon, which I understand is an excellent energizer. It was, however, seemingly designed to mostly tame the sometimes hot treble of the Stax SR009. So it might have a bit more of a rolled off treble than some energizers, and so that needs to be kept in the back of your mind as you listen to my sound impressions here. Because the signature, we'll start with that, struck me as a little bit mid-forward, but with some warmth to it. There's still some good bass extension and presence to it. And then the treble is, particularly the upper treble, is rolled off a little bit. So I don't know what shape to call that, because sometimes we talk about frequency response. You've got, flat, V-shaped, W, U-shaped, bright, dark, things like that. I'm not sure any of those terms fit the frequency response that I'm hearing here, because there is mid-forwardness, there is warmth, there is great bass extension and presence, but not elevated, and then there's that treble roll-off a little bit. Not sure what you want to call that shape, but that's all there. The overall presentation here is very smooth and relaxed. It still has really good detail retrieval, pulls out the micro detail very well. Things like room reverbs, ghost notes, audience noise in an orchestral concert, like all of those kinds of things are here. Like the resolution is excellent, but it still is a more relaxed and smooth presentation than either of the Stax that I have, for example, or some of the more resolving and aggressive planars that are out there. This is going to be a lot more relaxed and smooth than an Abyss planar magnetic headphone. It's going to be more relaxed and smooth than Audeze's own LCD5, right, in its presentation. Now, but again, that does not come at the cost of detail. Like, all of the details I heard are, all of the details that one would expect are there. Like, this is still very resolving, particularly through the mids, as I mentioned, with room reverbs and all of that. It's just not pushed at you, and it's not aggressive in that detail retrieval. Like, this really does seem, from a comfort and build standpoint and then a presentation standpoint, does seem to be like a more put it on your head, kick back, relax, and listen for long periods of time kind of presentation. All right. So, yeah, that electrostat speed is still here, but it's still nice and smooth and listenable while having that. Okay, the staging, the size of the soundstage did not really strike me in any particular direction as being overly big or overly small or intimate. It's kind of what it needs to be, I would say, more often than not. What does stand out, and I noticed this with all the electrostats that I have borrowed here, is that they are really good with imaging and separation within their soundstage. Like, their ability to position a sound and then create space between those sounds. So imaging is the positive of that, and then separation is like that space between, the negative of that. Like they're really good at that, and that was a very convincing aspect of the sound here. All right, now back to that bass. It's well extended. You get lots of rumble here. It has good presence, and there is a decent amount of like physicality, some punch and slam in the low end here. But you kind of have to listen for it. It doesn't really announce itself in that regard because the overall presentation here is more relaxed and smooth. And then there's a little bit of mid-forwardness, like the punchiness of the bass doesn't come out as much. It's there. I had to listen for it. It's not as noticeable as even my Hi-Fi-Man HE1000 V2 planar magnetic headphone. Like, that's not an overly punchy headphone in its own right, but this one is probably like just a little bit behind that in terms of its physicality and that punch. So it's not lacking. It's not a weakness. It's for an Electrostat, I would say it's probably above average in its punch and in its slam, from what I understand. But it's not like super standout in that regard, and it's again masked by the rest of the signature a little bit, and the rest of the signature and the rest of the presentation with that smoothness. Now, timbre is a comparative weakness at the $4,500 price point, I think, and that's for two reasons. One, this is still an E-Stat. Like, you can tell that it has that electrostatic sound. At least if those two Stax 009s are like representative of an electrostat sound, as I imagine they probably are. Like, these have aspects of that in the speed and in the micro detail retrieval and that sort of thing. But it also has some of the tonal and timbral qualities that come with those two, which isn't the most natural sounding in my opinion. Then on top of that, the mid-forwardness, like this is an Audeze thing. Like the Audeze house sound is sometimes a bit mid-forward and can get a little bit shouty and honky in the mids. And unfortunately, that aspect of their planar magnetic line has bled into this electrostatic headphone. Okay, so just however Audeze tunes their headphones, like they clearly have a preference for more mid-range presence than my ears are comfortable with, and it comes across as shouty and honky to me sometimes. Now, not really horrible. For me, it really wasn't even a deal breaker in terms of being able to enjoy it most of the time. But I did pick it out and was distracted by it at times, which if I were to spend my own money on this, I probably wouldn't do, because for, in my opinion, $4,500 for this, plus a few thousand more for a good energizer to go along with it, I don't want that, right? So that affects the timbre a little bit too much, particularly through the mids, in my opinion. However, the treble timbre here, even though the treble is a little bit more rolled off and relaxed from a frequency response standpoint, the treble timbre is excellent here. Like cymbal crashes, hi-hat rides, all of that kind of stuff. Like that sounds really natural to me on this, which is on the flip side of what Audeze does for timbre. That's a thing they do well. Like I remember the LCD-X was really shouty, particularly the older edition, but that treble timbre was just amazing at the price point. And the LCD 2.4 was similar, shouty, honky mids, but just really lush, natural treble timbre. And that treble timbre here for an electrostat, I think, is really excellent, and probably competes with some of the nicer planar magnetics out there. It's not going to catch Susvara. It may not catch the dynamic driver Focal Utopia on that, but it's not, relatively speaking, that's a strength of this in the treble timbre. Okay, now as I mentioned, I also have on hand the Stax SR009 and SR009S for comparison here. I will do a more fleshed out comparison when I'm done reviewing those two, but I will just say a few quick words on how these stack up. Like how they stacks up. Haha, anyway. These are not quite as lively sounding. They are not as active sounding as the Stax are. They are more relaxed and just a little bit more chill and lush. They have more bass presence than those two. They might actually have a little bit more slam, but because of that just overall more chill presentation, you don't notice the bass punch and slam as much as you do on those others. When I went to listen for the slam, and I played tracks like a surprisingly punchy track is Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon, right? Zevon? Anyway. Surprisingly punchy. But then also, more stereotypically punchy would be Trouble Coming by Royal Blood. And in those tracks, these punched harder than either of the Stax. Pretty close to as punchy as my my planar magnetic HE1000 V2 from Hi-Fi-Man, but so in that ballpark, I would say. Not going to catch Focal or Fostax in that regard. Not going to catch the rest of Audeze's LCD line in that regard. But it was there, and the Stax were not there to that level. The Stax had a little bit more bass texture, though, I think, than these. So I will leave the comparisons, the more fleshed out comparisons with the Stax for another video, but I think that's enough to get us started here, where these are a little bit more warm, a little bit more shouty. I don't think I said that one, but a little more shouty, honky in the mids than the Stax. But they're just a little bit more relaxed and smooth sounding than those as well. But still, the mid-range detail retrieval in particular, I think, is right there with the Stax gear. All right. I will leave it there. That has been my review of the Audeze CRBN Electrostatic Headphone as played off of the Mjolnir Carbon amp. And so again, I want to again emphasize that I've only heard that Mjolnir Carbon, and that again was designed to control the treble of the Stax SR009 a little bit, which might make the roll-off in the treble here seem a little bit more than it actually is or would be on another amp. I can't say. Just something to keep in mind. Anyway, a more relaxed presentation than the other electrostats that I've heard so far, but still very good detail retrieval. A little bit mid-forward with some warmth, a little bit rolled off treble, great bass extension and presence, a decent amount of bass slam, which is impressive for an electrostat from what I understand, so forth. So a pretty solid entry into Audeze's collection of headphones. A really interesting entry point into the electrostatic game for them. So if they continue on with electrostats, I am definitely curious to see what they come up with next. So yeah, 2021 was a good year for Audeze. All right, well, that'll do it for now. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Audeze CRBN Electrostatic Headphone, and until next time, enjoy the music.